For most of human history, we told ourselves a simple story. We evolved, we spread, we survived, and everyone else died out. A clean, linear march from primitive to modern, from ape to astronaut. That story is wrong. The deeper scientists dig, the stranger it gets, because the evidence now shows that for tens of thousands of years, we were not alone. We shared this planet with other versions of humanity. Some of them looked almost like us. Some didn't. Some bred with us. Some vanished without a trace. And at least one of them has been hiding in an abandoned well in northern China since 1933, waiting for a dying old man to finally tell his grandchildren where he hid it. In this video, we're going through 5 of the most unsettling discoveries in the history of human evolution. A skull so ancient and so strange, it forced scientists to redraw the human family tree. A ghost population we've never found a single bone of, yet whose DNA still lives inside millions of people today. A group of cave dwellers who survived in southern China until just 11,000 years ago, looking nothing like anything that should have existed that recently. A species that spread across an entire continent and then vanished so completely that we almost missed them entirely. And 2 tiny island peoples so distinct from everything else in the fossil record that scientists had to invent new names just to describe them. None of this is speculation. All of it is documented, peer-reviewed, and published. And all of it points to the same conclusion. The story of humanity is not a straight line. It's a tangled web. And we're only just beginning to see how many threads were woven into it. As always, visuals are there for context, but you don't need to watch to follow along. Whether you're settling in for the night, or just looking for something worth listening to, get comfortable. Because by the end of this, the way you think about what it means to be human will never quite be the same. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we do this every week. Now let's begin. In 1933, a Chinese laborer working on the construction of the Dongjiang Bridge in northern Harbin made a discovery that would remain secret for nearly 90 years. While digging through riverbank sediment, he pulled out a skull. Not a recent skull, an ancient one, massive, heavy, and unlike anything he had ever seen. He understood immediately that it was significant. The discovery of Peking man just a few years earlier had generated enormous excitement, and this skull dwarfed even that find in its strangeness. But the timing was catastrophic. Harbin was under Japanese occupation. A laborer found in possession of a potentially valuable archaeological artifact during wartime faced serious consequences. So he did the only thing he could think of. He wrapped it up, carried it home, and dropped it into an abandoned well on his property. There it stayed, through the Japanese occupation, through the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, through decades of political upheaval that made keeping quiet feel like survival. The man never told anyone. He lived with the knowledge of what was sitting at the bottom of that well and said nothing for the rest of his life. Only in his final moments did he call his grandchildren close and tell them where to look. In 2018, a family member retrieved the skull. A Chinese paleoanthropologist convinced the family to donate it to Hebei GEO University for scientific research. What followed overturned assumptions that had been built over decades. The skull was at least 146,000 years old. It dated to the Middle Pleistocene, a period when multiple species of humans were moving across the ancient world. And it was enormous. At 23 centimeters long and over 15 centimeters wide, it was larger than any modern human skull, and larger than any Neanderthal skull yet found. It had low, elongated proportions, massive brow ridges, wide eye sockets, a large mouth, and a broad nose that suggested adaptation to cold, high-energy environments requiring large volumes of air intake. Scientists estimated it belonged to a robust male, roughly 50 years old when he died. But here's the part that sent the scientific community into debate that still hasn't fully settled. Despite all those ancient, archaic features, the skull's facial structure was strikingly close to modern humans. Not Neanderthal, not Homo erectus, something else. Something that sat on the family tree in a position closer to us than the Neanderthals were. The species was formally designated Homo longi, dragon man in Chinese. And its discovery didn't just add a new entry to the catalog. It suggested something far more disruptive: that the closest ancient relative of modern Homo sapiens may not have been the Neanderthals at all, but a population we never knew existed, living across northern Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, waiting to be found in a well. Around 50,000 years ago, in what is now West Africa, something happened that left a mark so subtle we almost missed it entirely. And we only found it because we weren't looking for bones. The climate in Africa is merciless to organic material. Fossils that survive for hundreds of thousands of years in the cold, dry caves of Europe dissolve in the heat and humidity of the African interior within tens of thousands. So for years, the story of ancient human diversity in Africa remained frustratingly incomplete. We knew modern humans evolved there. We knew they spread outward. But what they shared the continent with remained largely invisible. Then, geneticists stopped looking for fossils and started looking at DNA. Specifically, the DNA of living people. A team of population geneticists conducted a comprehensive analysis involving hundreds of individuals from Nigeria and Sierra Leone. When they mapped the genetic data and ran it through models of ancient population mixing, they found something that didn't belong. Fragments of DNA that couldn't be traced to any known human species. Not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, not any population of Homo sapiens we have ever identified. They called it ghost DNA because it came from a species that left no physical trace we've ever found. Only this genetic shadow, preserved in the blood of West Africans living today. The interbreeding appears to have happened roughly 50,000 years ago. The ghost population itself appears to have diverged from the main human lineage nearly 2 million years ago, making it older than Neanderthals and Denisovans both. And based on the genetic modeling, this wasn't a minor encounter. It was a sustained period of contact, substantial enough to leave measurable traces across an entire modern population. 8 different scenarios were modeled to understand how those genes could have been distributed. The conclusion was that this ghost species didn't just interact with modern humans. It also appears to have crossed paths with Neanderthals and Denisovans, suggesting it was part of a complex web of ancient populations moving across continents and interbreeding in ways we are only beginning to map. The fate of the ghost ancestor remains completely unknown. They could have died out and left only their genes behind as evidence they ever existed. Or their lineage could have been so thoroughly absorbed into the modern human population that they effectively became us. We don't know. We have no bones, no tools, no cave paintings, no burial sites. Just the echo of their existence, living quietly in the DNA of people in Nigeria and Sierra Leone. An entire species, reduced to a whisper in a genome. In 1989, limestone miners in the Maludong Cave in southwest China found fossils buried deep in the rock. They left them there. It wasn't until 2008 that researchers finally retrieved partial skulls and bone fragments from Maludong and the nearby Longlin caves, representing the remains of at least 4 individuals. When carbon dating came back, the results were deeply uncomfortable. These individuals had lived between 14,300 and 11,500 years ago. That is recent. That is frighteningly recent by the standards of ancient human diversity. By that point, Homo sapiens with modern anatomy had been the only humans on the planet for tens of thousands of years. The Neanderthals were gone. The Denisovans were gone. Every other archaic species we knew about had vanished long before. Yet here were 4 individuals with skulls that looked nothing like modern humans. They had jutting jaws, broad, flat faces, prominent brow ridges, thick skulls, large molar teeth, and brains the size typical of Ice Age populations. They were named the Red Deer Cave People, after evidence that large deer were cooked and eaten in the Maludong Cave. And they created an immediate scientific argument that still hasn't fully resolved. One camp argues they were a hybrid population, modern humans who had interbred with an archaic species and retained ancient physical traits as a result. The hybrid model would explain the mosaic of features and would account for why they weren't classified as a separate species outright. But it comes with its own problem. A hybrid population living alongside fully modern humans tends to be absorbed over generations, not persist with such distinct archaic features until 11,500 years ago. The other camp argues they represent a completely separate evolutionary lineage that survived in isolation in southern China long after every other archaic population had disappeared elsewhere. A relict population, as researchers describe it. A branch that simply kept going while the rest of the world moved on around them. What makes this even stranger is the genetic data. Comparisons revealed striking connections between the Red Deer Cave People and Native Americans and modern East Asians. The closest genetic match found was a 13,900-year-old specimen from Siberia, the oldest human DNA yet identified in the Americas. That connection suggests a population that settled in southern China for a considerable period before some of them migrated north and eventually crossed into the Americas, carrying their unusual genetic signature with them. The Red Deer Cave People weren't a footnote. They were the living proof that modern humans coexisted with at least one other distinct human population in mainland East Asia until almost the beginning of recorded history. They were our neighbors, and we have no idea what happened to them. In 2008, archaeologists excavating Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia found a fragment of a juvenile finger bone. It was small, unremarkable to look at. But by 2010, mitochondrial DNA extracted from that fragment revealed something that rewrote the textbooks. The bone belonged to a completely unknown species of human. They were named Denisovans, after the cave where they were found. And from that single finger bone, plus a handful of teeth, a piece of skull, and extraordinary DNA analysis, scientists have reconstructed the outline of a species that once ranged across an enormous portion of the ancient world. Physical reconstruction suggests they resembled Neanderthals in build and facial structure, with dark skin, dark eyes, and dark hair. But the DNA showed they were a separate branch, distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans, diverging from the Neanderthal line somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 years ago. They appear to have ranged across Asia for tens of thousands of years, from the Siberian mountains to the Tibetan plateau to the limestone caves of Laos. Evidence suggests they were still present somewhere in Asia as recently as 14,500 years ago, possibly overlapping with the last years of the Red Deer Cave People. And they interbred with us, extensively. The highest concentrations of Denisovan DNA in modern populations are found in Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and Filipino Negrito groups. Some Papua New Guinean populations carry Denisovan ancestry at levels around 5%, a figure that reflects sustained, multi-generational contact rather than a single, isolated encounter. Genetic modeling now suggests there may have been 3 distinct Denisovan subgroups, each with their own geographic range, each contributing differently to the modern populations that descended from the regions they inhabited. One of those contributions is extraordinarily specific: the genetic variant that allows Tibetan people to live and work at high altitudes without the oxygen-related health problems that affect most humans at elevation. A variant that functions like a biological altitude adaptation came from the Denisovans. Modern Tibetans carry a version of the EPAS1 gene that traces directly to Denisovan ancestry, a gift from a species that lived in high-altitude environments for thousands of years before modern humans arrived. We have almost nothing of them: a finger bone, a few teeth, a skull fragment. But their DNA is alive in hundreds of millions of people today, scattered across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. They didn't disappear completely. They dissolved into us. The last story is actually 2 stories, because the same impossible thing happened twice in 2 different places. In the limestone chambers of Callao Cave on the Philippine island of Luzon, fossils of teeth and bones from at least 3 individuals were recovered in 2019. They were roughly 50,000 years old, and they belonged to a species so distinct from everything in the fossil record that it required its own name: Homo luzonensis. In the caves of Flores, the Indonesian island where archaeologists had already found stone tools and animal butchery marks suggesting sophisticated ancient behavior, a different species had been living: Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit. Discovered in 2003, standing roughly 3 to 4 feet tall, with a brain approximately 1/3 the size of a modern human's, yet apparently capable of making tools, hunting, and using fire. Both species shared certain features: small bodies, curved finger and toe bones suggesting adaptation to tree climbing, mosaic skeletal traits, mixing characteristics from multiple different human species, as if evolution had been running several experiments at once. Both appear to have reached their respective islands through either deliberate sea crossing or accidental transport by natural events like tsunamis, then lived in isolation long enough to evolve their own distinct characteristics through a phenomenon known as island dwarfism, where isolated populations gradually reduce in size over generations. Homo floresiensis survived on Flores until at least 50,000 years ago, a period when modern humans were already present in the region. Whether they met, whether they competed, whether there was conflict or coexistence, or something else entirely, we don't know. No direct evidence of interaction has been found, but the temporal overlap is real, and the geographic proximity is real. And the silence of the fossil record on that question feels less like an absence of events and more like an absence of witnesses. 2 islands, 2 tiny human species, both gone. Both leaving almost nothing behind except enough bones to prove they were real, and enough unanswered questions to keep researchers arguing for decades. Pull them together and the picture that emerges is nothing like the one we were taught. Dragon Man proves a massive, previously unknown human species lived across northern Asia, and may have been our closest ancient relative. The ghost ancestor proves an entire species can vanish without leaving a single bone, surviving only as fragments of DNA in people alive today. The Red Deer Cave people prove archaic humans were still living alongside modern Homo sapiens in China until 11,500 years ago, so recently it barely registers as ancient at all. The Denisovans prove a species can range across an entire continent, interbreed with us extensively, and still remain so obscure that we defined them from a child's finger bone. And the island species prove that human evolution wasn't a single story. It was dozens of stories, running simultaneously on islands and in caves and across continents, most of them ending in silence. The lesson isn't just that we had more relatives than we knew. It's that the definition of human was never as clear as we wanted it to be. For most of our existence, being human meant being one species among several, competing, coexisting, occasionally becoming something new together. We are not the end of that story. We are just the version that survived long enough to start writing it down. Now it's your turn. Which of these 5 hit hardest? And if you had to guess what other species are still out there in the fossil record, waiting to be found, drop it in the comments below. We read all of them. Click the video on screen now to keep going. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And as always, until next time, stay curious.